Good day and welcome back to The Shed. Today we go back to 2005 and we'll take a look at Susanna Clarke's debut novel that won the Hugo Award for that year, Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell. So what I would like to do is break down this big behemoth of a novel. It's over 1,000 pages and I'll provide a spoiler-free plot overview. I'll talk to what I liked, what I didn't like. I'll make some recommendations. We'll put it to the memory test and I'll rank it on our ever-growing Sci-Fi share ladder where I've been ranking all these wonderful novels. So this alternate history fantasy novel is written in 3 parts, very much in the style of Austen and Dickens. So it's got that pure 1800s type vibe to the writing that I thought was really enjoyable. And we learned that there's this learned brotherhood of magicians. And they seem to be these historians more than anything, learning about magic. Because the premise of the novel is that magic is real and once existed and was heavily practiced in England. So there's this brotherhood of magicians who are just theoretical magicians, and they quickly learn of this Mr Norrell, who claims to be a practicing magician, so a real magician. So they're sort of really curious about this and invite him along to one of their sessions. And what we learned is that there's this Mr Pole, he's a minister, who his wife has suddenly come to ill health and she has died. And Mr Norrell tried to buy favor from this politician, basically, summons up this fairy to help him bring a young lady Pole back to life. And what we learn is that the man with the thistle down hair, this fairy that is summoned, has a pretty heavy cost to the price of resurrecting this woman, which rather becomes apparent. We also learn of a nameless slave who's prophesied to be king over all of England. This soon falls on the ears of a Jonathan Strange, who's so taken on by this prophecy, decides to take on this magician's guild as well. So he wants to learn about magic, and he goes to the only practical magician and Mr Norrell, and soon gets an apprenticeship with him. Now, Volume 2 is set in the year 1809, and we mainly learn about Jonathan Strange because he comes into real success and fame, because Mr Norrell is a bit of a deadbeat when it comes to his personality, at least, and Mr Strange is quite the opposite, so he gets quite a liking. And there's a Napoleonic war going on at the time in this historically accurate novel, and we see Jonathan Strange helping both the Napoleonic Wars and the Battle of Waterloo. So a lot of chapter 2 deals with Jonathan Strange and the differences in Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell have when it comes to the way they practice their magic. So we also learned that Jonathan Strange's wife and Lady Pole form a friendship of sorts, which doesn't go unnoticed in the eyes of the man with the thistle down hair. So this has some rather interesting repercussions as well. We soon find that there's a split between Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell in what turns out to be the Strangeites and the Norrellites, I think they were called in the novel, which has these 2 different schools of thoughts when it comes to magic and magic going forward in England. This all sort of comes together in the final installment in John Osglass, the volume 3 of this novel, where it has the prophecy of the nameless slave, the prophecy of the originator of magic in this John Osglass, the man with this thistle down hair, and the Strangeites and Norrellites all coming together into an interesting and fascinating finale to this wonderful and epic book in Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell. So what is there to like in Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell? For me, it would have to 100% be the writing. I think that, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen style of writing just fits the setting in this novel perfectly. We have this, alternate history in 1806 where magic is real, and that writing style, I think, is just wonderful. This is one of those novels that you just read for the sake of reading. And I'll come to that when it comes to some of my dislikes as well, but I'd have to say that the writing was just an absolute standout. And when it comes to the Sci-Fi shed ladder, where I've been ranking all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels, I'd have to say that this one shines on its own when it comes to the board, when it comes to that style of writing. I honestly don't recall there being any other Hugo or Nebula award-winning novel that is written in this historically accurate format that stands alone. I'll talk to some of those when it comes to the recommendations, but when it comes to the writing, that Jane Austen, Charles Dickens writing, there's just nothing else that quite compares to it on the board. And it was definitely one of the key things I took away from this one as pure enjoyment. The other thing that I really enjoyed was the characters and the dialogue that these characters had. Now, you'll notice that if you see the full list, how I've ranked these novels to date, that the novels that seem to be doing really well on the Sci-Fi share ladder are those novels that have really interesting characters and sometimes flawed characters. And I would have to say that this has both. These are just wonderful characters in this novel. The whole cast of characters I thought were just fascinating. And they also have that human quality that is, I'm sometimes flawed. I'm not always black and white. I sometimes, most of the time, live in that grey area where I don't know if my actions are good or bad, but somewhere in between. And we also see that in the conflict between Norrell and Jonathan Strange. It's never black and white. It's never necessarily resolved. And there's not necessarily, you know, I'm with you or against you, but somewhere in between. And that's what I thought fascinating about this one. The characters and the dialogue between those characters were just wonderful. The other thing I really enjoyed is that this novel has the ability to transport you into a simpler time. It's just a wonderful book. I've been going through a bit of stress at the moment, nothing too serious, but I really enjoyed just at the end of the day picking up this book and losing myself in this 1806, 1809, 1812 time frame in this wonderfully researched, historically accurate fantasy alternate timeline, right? It just transported me. I was able to pick this novel up and just forget about the real world, right? Just for that couple of hours that I took reading through it. So it was just a wonderful novel, all said and done. But like always, there are a couple of things I could nitpick when I'm being highly critical of these novels. So when it comes to the dislike sections, I'd have to say that at times this one felt a little bit bloated. And the reason comes down to the footnotes. Now this novel is very highly accurate when it comes to the historical setting. And you don't have to do much but flick through the book to see a ton of footnotes that provide historical context or provide the magical context of this world. And I found it to be a little bit distracting at times when it came up through the dialogue and stuff. And, you know, and it's something that you can avoid. You don't necessarily need to read all the footnotes, but I feel that you will not get the full benefit of reading this wonderful novel, right, if you don't read the footnotes. But I'd have to say that at times for me it felt a little bit bloated and it was a little bit of a distraction, but one that I still recommend you do. That is, you know, read the footnotes, because I don't think you'll get the full enjoyment of this novel if you don't otherwise. I'm just exaggerating a little, suggesting that it can be a bit of a distraction at times. The other thing I would have to say is that there's a section in this novel in part 2 that talks to the Napoleonic Wars and the Battle of Waterloo, and I found those sections to just drag on a little. I mean, it was interesting to see how magic played a part in this historical context, in this alternate reality. So I sort of found that fascinating and enjoyable, but I just found that it was a little bit dragged out again for me, for my personal enjoyment. But the biggest thing I'd have to say about this one, which is no fault of Susanna Clarke's, but this particular edition here that I think is the Bloomsbury, I'll put a note down below. I mean, it's over 1,000 pages. It's 1,006 pages. But that font, which is wonderfully illustrated as well, mind you, but the font in this novel is just to the point of almost unreadable. It is a strain on the eyes, and I recommend don't pick up this particular version that I have here if you wear glasses or if you're going to read in poor lighting conditions, because it's going to be a big eye strain. And I found that to be honestly a bit of a hurdle. I found myself having to pick this one up at lunchtimes or over the weekends during the day, because the font was honestly a bit unreadable for me. It was almost unreadable. So when it comes to the memory test, this one is an interesting one because it's a big chunky old novel, and I read this one, it must have been around about 2005 when it first came out. I think I might have read this when it first came out in Australia at release, so it might have been 2005, 2006, and I haven't revisited it because it is daunting. It is a daunting novel to go through. So it's been a good 20 years now since I last read this novel, and I'd have to say that, you know, reading through it, the setting and the writing stood the test of time. I knew I was going to get into that classic, wonderful period correct writing, and those characters being wonderful, complicated, complex, wonderful individuals. The whole cast of characters was wonderful. And I'd have to say that stood the test of time, right? I remember coming into this reading thinking, I'm going to get that wonderful Jane Austen, Charles Dickens type vibe. It's going to become apparent, and it becomes apparent as soon as you open the first page. And I remember those characters being wonderful. But honestly, I couldn't remember much of the actual characters as far as what they actually brought to the plot. I couldn't remember what Jonathan Strange did when it comes to those Napoleonic Wars, what Mr. Norrell's views were when it came to magic and John Osglass, and how they differed to what Jonathan Strange's were. I couldn't really remember what happened to Lady Pole and her ordeal with the man with the thistle down hair, nor could I remember the ending and the climax of this book. So I'd have to say that when it comes to the memory test, the writing was definitely what I took away, but the plot and the characters, as enjoyable as they were, did not really last the test of time. So it's going to be rather interesting to see how it lands on the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder. But before we do that, I want to make some recommendations, and that is to say that it is still a very worthy read, this one. I mean, it's a worthy Hugo Award-winning novel and a wonderfully written novel. And I'd have to say that it stands alone on the board when it comes to similar novels. But I still want to make some similar recommendations that I think if you've enjoyed some of these books, you will also enjoy Jonathan Strange. And one of those is the Doomsday Book by Connie Willis. Because this is, again, a historically correct novel. I don't think it's as well researched as Jonathan Strange is, but it is still a very well researched novel that takes place with a bunch of historians going back in time to look at the events during the bubonic plague in England. So I think, and this one also is one of those books that you don't read because you just want to fly through the plot, right? This one is also a novel that you just read because of the setting, because of those characters, and you read for reading's sake. So as I was reading Jonathan Strange, this one definitely came back to me from time to time, as in, this has got to be a comparison that I run when it comes to recommendations. So if you enjoyed the Doomsday Book, I dare say you're going to enjoy Jonathan Strange, and vice versa. Another one that we've covered today on the board, which is The Claw of the Conciliator, in Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun, right? Now, it's a completely different setting. I mean, this is a future setting, right? This is a future Earth where magic and myth and, it's all interblended, science fiction, fantasy themes combined, where this is more of a, Jonathan Strange is more of a historical, alternate history. This is more of an alternate future, future novel. But where I want to draw the similarities is that Gene Wolfe is also a wonderful writer, but he's writing also in this very archaic language, using very archaic words that are not used in modern language. So he paints this wonderful scene and setting that Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell also conjured up, right? Is visions of this wonderful novel as well. So I'd have to say, if you've enjoyed Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun, have a go at Jonathan Strange, because I think you'll see similarities there, not so much in the plot and the setting, but in the writing. The others that come to mind, which have yet to be covered on the Sci-Fi Share Ladder, but they will be coming up, is Connie Willis's books, All Clear, or Blackout, and All Clear. Another two big chunky novels that I'm looking forward to revisiting this year. But I think if you like Connie Willis in Blackout and All Clear, you're also going to enjoy Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell. Hey, let's flip the cameras around and see where this one lands. So back to the Share Ladder and ranking today's 2005 debut and Hugo Award-winning novel by Susanna Clarke, Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell. I've been contemplating where this will sit exactly when I apply my full criteria that I've documented below. Because this is a rather interesting one. Because when I look at the concept, I thought it was an interesting concept, but we're talking about an alternate history novel where there's a flavor of magic, which is a reality in this. So I'd have to say that the concept was good, but not necessarily great, or something that we haven't seen before, even on the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder. So I'd have to say the concept was really good, but where this one really shone for me was in the execution. I thought it was brilliantly done. I thought the writing style was brilliant, right, in that sort of Jane Austen, what's his name, Dickens, right? Charles Dickens. Just the voice to this novel was just wonderful. So it did really well in the execution and the writing. The characters also got some pretty decent marks because of just the way they were. They were just really interesting, really well thought out characters that I thought were a highlight. Where it didn't quite do so well was in the plot. I thought the plot was okay, look, it was good, but it definitely didn't pass the memory test, right? Which is another one of the criteria that I have. So all in all, it's a pretty good novel that is going to challenge the novels on the A and really the novels on the B side. And I've been thinking about this for so much time now, and I'm still struggling, so we're going to pretty much do this live together on camera and see exactly where this one sits. I mentioned the likes of The Claw of the Conciliator also being a wonderfully written novel, and that use of archaic language and archaic words just painted this beautiful story in The Claw of the Conciliator. And the characters in The Shadow of the Torturer were just unforgettable, right? The main protagonist, this kid, we learn about his life growing up as an assassin and the mystery behind it. Why is he telling this story? The unreliable narrator that I thought was involved in that plot as well. Really wonderful novel. But really where I think I've got to give it to The Claw is you cannot deny that that novel is a fantasy and a science fiction novel, right? It's got that wonderful blend of both, where this one is really difficult to categorize as a fantasy novel or most definitely not a science fiction novel. It is a work of fiction. We're talking alternate history, but it flows like magic, some of this, right? The magical qualities that we have in here with the fairies and the man with the thistle down hair. So it is considered a fantasy novel, but when it comes to that concept, I would have to say that this is clear. It is a fantasy and a science fiction novel. So I'm going to have to give it to The Claw. We got some other wonderful books on here, like The Man in the High Castle, Red Mars, The Three Body Problem, Zelazny's Lord of Light, Our Fire Upon the Deep, The Wind-Up Girl, Red Shirts. Ah, man. All of these novels are just so good. The B-side is really difficult to rank, right? Because they're all wonderful novels and there's really not much between these novels. That is a real struggle. But then we got Flowers for Algernon or Algernon, whatever. Right? We got Flowers on there. And it's just a wonderful novel by Daniel Keyes. One of my all-time heartwarming, tear-jerking novel. Beautiful piece of literature. And the reason it sits there is because I really found it difficult when I'm applying my criteria, trying to keep true to it, that this is a science fiction novel. I mean, I've mentioned it many times, there's not much science fiction in Flowers for Algernon, which is why we're placed where we are on the board. And I've really been thinking, is it going to be Jonathan Strange, that is, between Claw or between Flowers? And I think I've maybe made up my mind, and I'm struggling. Flowers for Algernon. I was gonna say, oh, I hate doing this to Flowers for Algernon, because I was gonna say I've made up my mind and I'm gonna rank Jonathan Strange below Flowers for Algernon and call it a day. And I hate doing this for Flowers for Algernon, but I've got to keep true to this weighted criteria, dang it. And I've got to say that Jonathan Strange is almost on par, but I'm going to have to give it to Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Because Flowers for Algernon just does not have enough of science fiction in there when I look at my weighted criteria to allow it to sit above Flowers for Algernon. What a conflict. I hate doing that. I hate doing this to Flowers for Algernon. It is one of my personal, disregarding any criteria, it would have to be one of my favourite books of all time. But I think when I look at what I've done with the criteria and trying to keep it consistent, I think it's fair to say that Jonathan Strange just has enough of a science fiction or fantasy concept to rank better than Flowers. And I think it is better than Rite of Passage, definitely better than Game, and given his reputation of late. Among others, The Uplift War, A Deepness in the Sky, Star Tide Rising, all the others that follow. I have to say that the writing in this and the characters are just really, really well done. It rivals any real work of fiction when it comes to writing. Have you read Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell? It's a hefty book. It takes some commitment, but I highly recommend it. I think you will be pleased. Would you have ranked it higher, lower if you have read it? Do you think I should tweak my criteria? Probably a bit too late to do that just now, given that I'm almost more than halfway now, getting to the tail end of what is a wonderful set of novels. But like I said, I honestly want to stress that all of these novels are really good, and if I was to revisit this board, it will be all scrambled, somewhat similar, but would not look like this in 10 years' time. Hey, I've always enjoyed this segment. It's always a bit difficult because I try to do these as live as possible. And until next time, I hope you join me. Hit that subscribe and notification bell so you see me stress out about this a little bit more in the future.